Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining the WR Meadows podcast. Today we have a special guest with us. His name is Al Levy. Al comes from a contractor and trades background. Al recently wrote a book called The Power Contractor. That's what we're here to discuss. If you haven't read the book or heard of the book, I'd highly recommend picking it up. It's about a 2 hour read. Helped me a lot, even if you're not in the contractor business. He has tips and tricks. If you're not sure and you're still on the fence of whether to get it, I would highly recommend you check out the Power Contractor website. And with that, let's get into our show. Thanks for watching. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the WR Meadows podcast. I'm Riley. It's unusual we don't have a host with me, but one of them is on vacation and the other one is under the weather. So with us today is Al Levy. Al, if you could give a mild background and or explain the passions as to how you got here before we get into any questions.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity as always. And yes, also thank you for getting my name pronounced right, Al Levy. It is a weird spelling. I get it. There's 4 letters, and everybody's butchered it for years of my life. So I grew up in a family business. Plumbing, heating, air conditioning, electric is what we ended up in, and it's on Long Island, New York. For those if you know where JFK Airport is, just go towards the water. That's us. And so we served from the New York Manhattan backwards. We didn't go into Manhattan, 115 miles tip to tip, and there's a reason they named it Long Island. And I was third generation in the business, but I started like most kids in a business. By the time I was 8, I was emptying baskets, cleaning toilets, and going out and being a helper to the industry. So it's in my bloodstream. The good news for me is my dad was a serial entrepreneur, and he would have myself and my 2 older brothers, who were my partners in the business, in meetings when we were teenagers, learning about the business basics. So his word was, sit in the back of the room, write down whatever you want, but don't interrupt, and I'll answer all your questions later. So we had a series of dairy stores, ice cream shops. We had liquor stores. We were a radiant heat manufacturer. We were software to contractors, multi-state real estate. So even though my book is called Power Contractor, it's to everyone. Now,
Yeah,
if you're a
it's a hand
contractor,
in everything.
yes, yeah. So my father, it was actually the story behind this. Of course, my father was the original, and so it's actually started at my grandfather's gas station in 1936. So we've been around for a while. And by the way, the happy news to the end of the story here, or at least the end for now, is my middle brother, who's older than me, his son, my nephew, is now the 4th generation in the business. And the essence of this is it takes systems to be able to pass a business along. That's kind of
Sure.
what changed everything for us.
Wow, that's really interesting. So why we're here is to discuss the Power Contractor. I read it yesterday. I was going in expecting it to be very applicable to contractors. Me being not in the contracting business, but in the manufacturing, I took pages of notes on what manufacturers even can improve. And I'm going to go further. It's not just manufacturers, it's all facets of business, of all business. So, Al, if you could explain what made you want to write the book and just what made it come about.
I was lucky enough, for some reason, being the youngest of 3 brothers and my dad, I was able to have the vision to see forward. And what I always talk about, my tagline for this business has been less stress and more success. Because on any given day, I was making a lot of money, but it was killing me. And
Mhm.
so as a young man, I decided that being a really dead rich guy should not be my goal. And so I worked really hard to learn how to, handle these things, because every day it felt like the waves were just smashing me, if you will. And so
Mhm.
it really came back to, looking up and looking ahead, feeling like a hostage to my own staff. I don't care what company you are, you know what I'm talking about. Forget about how crazy it is today. But that's one of the advantages of living a longer life, is that I've seen these waves come before. Now it's different, totally different. I may be old, but I didn't live through the last flu epidemic in 1917 or whatever. But trust me,
Mhm.
this has really helped. I will say the good news is, for the contractors that I worked with, because they had these systems, because they had these manuals, it was easier for them to tweak it. It was easy for them to go to remote, which, as terrible as this is, and the COVID that we're dealing with is, can you imagine if this had hit just 10 years ago?
Oh
Our
yeah.
inability to do what we're doing today, which is Zoom or WebEx or any of these other things, the ability to work from home pretty much flawlessly in the home service industry. Uh, People go like, well, what did you work with? Because you were plumbing, heating, cooling, electric. And I go, well, the fact of the matter is we did the same thing as far as making sure that we took care of, really the basics of the system. So I worked with a photographer.
Hmm.
The photographer called me up and I go, I take pictures, but I don't really know how to do that. So they just
Yeah.
said to me, look, your technicians are our photographers. Your dispatchers are the people who set up these photo appointments. So business is more alike. And one of the things I was starting to share about my dad, when people would tell him how different their business was, he would take his thumb and forefinger and they'd be like a millimeter apart. He goes, it's about that different. And so
Yeah.
these seven powers
Yes.
are the way to think of it is your company, your goal is to make it like a pyramid in that the bigger and stronger the blocks are at the bottom, the further you can take it. So those seven blocks, in my opinion, is planning power, operating power, staffing power, sales coaching, marketing, and finance. Those are the seven. And I have been lucky to work with some of the best contractors from 2 million to 100 million all around this country, Canada. And now, because it's an online program, people in Australia and New Zealand are using my systems, which
Wow.
for a person I'm just blown away by it and very much, something really that's exciting to happen because, again, technology has changed things in such a way that, is really inconceivable. But the point of it is that I've worked with garage door companies. I've worked with roofing contractors. I worked with kitchen cabinetry. We didn't do any of those. It's
Yeah.
just because the business basics and then editing it to fit. So one that I will share, I think most apropos here is I got a call from a condominium builder in downtown Montreal, and
Hmm.
he had been 85 million a year in sales, had a beautiful building. We talked on the phone, and I always ask for the org chart. I want to see what you have, whether you have one or don't have one, or how messed up is it. And he
Sure.
sent me pages of an org chart, pages. And so I'm looking through this and I'm just like, so I called him up and I just told him, I said, if you expect me to come work with you um, with all of these managers, instead of working with you personally, it's not going to work.
Hmm.
That's all that I said. So I show up on day one and we're in the fancy office, which is not usually the MO of where I go, but downtown,
Sure.
fancy office. And he walks in and he says to me, I have a surprise for you. And I go, what's the surprise? He goes, I fired all those vice presidents. So, so I'm not usually known as an axe murderer. So just to be clear every year, I am not. But to the backstory is he had been an $85 million company. And the reason he was calling is because the money was going and didn't know where it was going. And he was
Hmm.
shrunk to about 35 million in sales. That's quite dramatic. So he said to me, you want to know what I found out? And I said, well, let me just tell you, they were hiding the truth from you. He goes,
Hmm.
exactly. And I said, yeah. And
Yeah.
here's what I'm going to tell you. I blame you, not them. And then even his office was a classic of, I've always been a believer in a one level office whenever
Hmm.
possible. Because there's a couple of dynamics that really work badly. When you have a second floor and that's where the owners and managers are, it fits to that famous thing about the ivory tower experience. And so
Absolutely.
he was disconnected from his own business. So we sold
Hmm.
off the top floor, recapitalized some money. I literally moved his desk to the middle of the floor. And so they could get a sense of what was going on. And I actually made him sign every check. Now, that still was a big company, as you can imagine.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
yeah, and what he loved it so much to understand. We also taught him a lot about what should be in house and what should be outsourced and how to outsource correctly using steps of delegation and the famous KPIs, key performance indicators and things of that nature. But it all
Hmm.
started with me doing his org chart the right way.
Sure. So I'm going to add something here. So basically, you started with the problem. you boiled it down to make it as efficient as possible. And that is where it all started. And once you got that going, it just went down to basics. So, and I think that's really interesting because that goes into your book is essentially you just take these basic business principles and you teach them to these trade workers primarily, and they take your business principles and they build a business around a great skill that's much needed in society. And a lot of times you just see that missing business piece. And I think that's super cool that you go into this and you change essentially what you did for this Montreal is you changed the culture, you changed the layout, you changed just the way he viewed his business. And I think that's super incredible.
Thank you. No,
So
I appreciate that. I would share one quick thing here is that as that owner, because I wanted to relate to the people that are listening here today,
sure.
is that if you were like me when it was such a load of stress, and the good news again, I was making money, really good money,
Mm-hmm.
is I believe that there must be 7 million things that I have to do right. Because if I'm a smart guy, I graduated with diploma that I mechanical engineering, which I never practiced in the day. I got a toolbox when I got home again, but that's what I think. And when I talk to, I mean, all business owners
Mm-hmm.
are thinking they're, because the next time they go to a podcast like this, or the next time there's a webinar or a seminar, or you get to a real life event, or you go into a Facebook group, industry Facebook group, you're going to get great information. But
Mm-hmm.
the problem is it also starts like, well, what do I do first? And where do I go? And how do I, and when I tell them there's only 7 things to focus on, no,
Mm-hmm.
it's got to be more than that. And the answer is there's a lot to unpack in what I blasted through in those 7 powers. But I can tell you that I have phenomenally successful contractors out there that none of them are a 10 out of 10 in every one of those 7 categories. But here's what
Yeah,
I can promise you, they're not a 0 in any one of those. So,
absolutely.
yeah, if you're an owner, and this goes to the org chart, the 2 most important boxes that you must occupy is the financial manager of your company
Mm-hmm.
and the marketing manager of your company, which a lot of times is like me walking up to you and poking you in the eye because they go,
Mm-hmm.
well, I'm not a marketing guy or I'm not a financial guy. And there's more to explain on that. And I'm happy to do so, if and when you want to talk about it. But that's what really changes companies when the owners grab hold of it and know what I mean by that.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Okay, so this brings us to our first question now that we got the introduction out of the way. Chapter 6 talks about delegating and prioritizing. And you talk about a top 30 and then you make it smaller and you make it a top 5 list. So if you could elaborate on that, and I just want maybe you could explain to the listeners what that is and how you've seen it be used in your real life application.
Yeah. So this is about planning power, which is the very first place that I start. And so I usually ask whoever I'm working with, do you need one more great idea or do you need one more great idea implemented? And the
Mm,
answer is always one more idea implemented. There's no shortage of ideas. So they have ideas, the team has ideas. And what I try to explain to them is the first step is to create a master project list. So think of it as a
mhm,
funnel. And the top of the funnel is where you load up every great idea that you have, that your team has, that you got on the internet, that you got in Facebook, that, like we talked about, all these other great sources of information. And that is where they start.
mhm,
And then they work their way down that list because in most cases, people I work with, it's about 120 to 150. They are not all projects. A lot of them
mhm,
are good habits, learning how to delegate, learning the steps of corrective action with your team. There's a lot of things beyond just projects. They're good habits that you absolutely have to get into your business. So how do they move from this big list? There are 2 filters. Think of them as strainers, and you're holding straining spaghetti. And so on the one side is it either fixes the biggest problem or challenge that you have,
mhm,
or it gives you the greatest opportunity to grow and be profitable. So in the case of the contracting world, where drive time is a killer, kills our billable hours, your guys leave the shop, they get an hour away from the shop, and they don't have what they need on the truck. Or they have what they need on the truck, but they don't know how to use it. And
Hmm.
so this is a problem. So that's where is a good example of how would it move down to your top 30. And the other one is, you know what, if we slow down and we maximize every call, that would put more money to the bottom line. If we
Hmm.
stop buying trucks and we lease trucks so they're not as worn out and not broken down as much, that would be an opportunity. So one of those two things is going to be a reason to go down that list. And then we arrive at your top 30. Now, I don't care how many people you have and how much money you have.
Hmm.
You cannot work on 30 things effectively at the same time. And I have worked at some big companies. It's
I
just
believe it.
chaos, just chaos.
Yeah.
So it sits on this list. And what do I mean by the top 30? If you and I, Riley, were to meet, we have a top 30 list and we don't see each other. Come next year, we're going to look at that top 30 to see how many of them you got in and in right at your company. That's what I mean by the top 30. So how do you work on this? You take those same strainers one more time, fix the biggest problem or challenge, greatest chance to grow and be profitable, and you get it down to your top 5. And the top 5 are the ones that you have selected because they came down that funnel, that these will have the biggest impact on fixing the biggest problem and challenge you have, or give you the greatest chance to grow and be profitable. Here's the deal though, when it hits the top 5, there is nothing that you are doing today that's more important than that list. Now, I
Absolutely.
understand that you have a building to put up as an architect. You've got plans to deliver. If you're a contractor, there's things that you have to do. If you're a manufacturer, stuff's got to move through the plant. I
Hmm.
totally get it. But if you're always, and the great Michael Gerber in his book years ago called The E-Myth spoke about that if you're always working in your business and never on it, nothing's going to change. That book
Hmm.
was a life changer for me way back in the 90s because I didn't know why it wasn't working. And when I
Hmm.
read this, I finally understood why that was the case. I understood what I had to do, and it gave me nothing in the way of how. But I'm a really good how. And so
Hmm.
that's what caused me to write the operating manuals. That's what caused me to write the training curriculum. That's what caused me to create a hands-on training center. That's what caused me to systematize our bids and everything else of that nature.
That's kind of funny you bring up Michael Gerber's book because I read that a couple years ago,
Oh, great.
and one of the questions I have is the term knowledge pig. So I personally have worked at a small organization where the owner did most of the work. This is previously to Meadows, and it was always difficult because he would feel like as a new hire I wasn't suited, and it would be more time for him to explain it. And it became like I couldn't do anything because he had the information I needed, and it just became this cyclical thing. So I'd love for you to explain what the term knowledge pig means and how you use it in your book, and maybe how we can avoid that issue.
Yeah, so that was the backstory to this was I was lucky enough to have an industry titan who was a good friend that would ride in my truck with me. So he'd be riding with the truck when we go out to a job because he was great at everything that he did. And he actually was a sociologist who ended up in the business in the heating trade as a industry writer. But he came from a sociology background. So he understood
Mm-hmm.
people. So I'm riding in the truck, and this, please don't freak out because this is going to sound as really old as it is. I was driving, and my beeper on my hip was going off, and my phone, that's the size of a bread box, is ringing, and my two-way radio, they're calling me. And he looks over at me and says the following: "You think that's normal?" And in that second, Riley, I said to myself, "I hate them all." And then I realized, well, I'm pretty darn important, aren't I? I
Yeah.
would say I'm indispensable. And I realized for the first time, really effectively, that as long as I was attached to that identity, I was never going to fix this thing
Mm-hmm.
because I was too attached to that. And that's when I started to unpack it about when am I a fireman? You know, I love to run. There's a fire. Let me get the fire truck. Since we've been a little boy, we want to do that. And then I started
Absolutely.
to put the fire out. And these guys were setting fires everywhere. So I was great as a firefighter and I stunk at fire prevention. I liked being the guru. You know what,
Yeah.
Ryan? You don't know that? Because I do. Would you like to know? Come see me. And
Yeah.
so that's part of it. And then the last one, you were talking about is a knowledge pick. So we were a company of 70 people. We had 25 really good service techs. We did residential, commercial, and industrial. So think of that vertical for a minute. On these big, huge heating systems, there was very complicated equipment. Guess who two people that went to that sophisticated training? One
You?
was named Al, and one
Yeah.
was named my brother Richie.
Okay.
So we actually had guys on call, not on call, sorry, on a shift, not like you wake them up at night, on a shift, 4 guys rotating every night. And they would get to this big job and they wouldn't know what to do. So they had to call up either Al or Richie to get that.
Mhm.
So I would have to get, after I finally got my long day, get up, go out there. And I hated them for it. But again, once I stopped hating them, I realized it was me. I had not
Yeah.
shared this information. That was another catalyst to the manuals, things that we began to share. So these things of being the knowledge pig is really a problem. Now, the org chart does help. And
Hmm.
I'm talking about the box org chart and not the one with the fancy titles of CIO, CFO, CEO, CTO, everything else you want. Just the boxes it takes to run your company. Now, I have one for contractors, but it's pretty close to whatever, and you obviously have to change it. It's best if it's relatively flat. And the reason I say that is I shouldn't have to go to a million people to see the wizard, is how I
Hmm.
would say that. And so the point of it is, as you climb the boxes and you have your policies and procedures of how I fill that box, 80% of what goes on, you're never going to cover the 100 weird. I should know what I need to know to own that box. And then I need to know what I need for the next box hire because I want to make more money. I want to have more responsibility. I want to have more job security. And I want to stay with you. And if you're smart as an owner, the goal is, be the employer of choice. And how do you do that? Offer careers and not a job.
Yeah. Can you elaborate on that last saying? Because I think there's a large portion of your book about that.
About offering a career, not a job.
Yeah, so I think like me personally, I'm younger. I got out of college and I looked for a job. And you think about as like someone looking for a job, you think, oh, I got to get a job immediately. And I think too often people go into interviews and don't really consider, is this a good fit for me? They think, oh, I hope this like employer hires me, and instead it's looking at what is a good fit for you. And I think using the term like the salary ladder you talk about and making it a
Yes.
career, I think it's like a great point that you don't see enough. So if you want to go ahead and elaborate
Yeah.
on it, I would appreciate it.
Yeah. So part of the catalyst for our industry so many years ago, I talked about life cycle. It was in the 80s. My brother Richie and I are sitting in a seminar and we're in our late 20s or something at the time. And the guy on the stage is going, the average technician's trending towards 50. And we were horrified at that thought because, just working in the field at 50 years old, and these are what the guys, this is awful. And
Mhm.
there were a series of events, including stupid conversations that my brother Richie and I would be the last people standing in an office at 2 a.m. We had finished our calls and we would be talking about why don't they do this and why don't they do that? And can you believe this person was the best at their shop? They're mediocre here, and we ruined our whole salary structure. And
Mhm.
so we finally bit the bullet and decided to hire young, willing people with no skills and provide skills. And that goes for every position. That includes accounts receivable, accounts payable, all of the boxes on the org chart. We would provide the training. We had to have the documented systems. We had to have the way to get you rising up. And so, again, using the pyramid is if you look at the box org chart, the biggest, thickest manuals are actually for the people at the bottom because the manager's job is really first, second, and third, hold them accountable to the policies and procedures it takes for them to successfully own their box, to
Mhm.
hit the KPIs again, key performance indicators for each of those boxes so they set themselves up in a good way for you to rise up through your company and to stay with you and to build the career that you promised them. So, it's funny. And I did most of the hiring interviews just because I was very concerned about the culture. And I wanted
Mhm.
to know, who I was hiring. It was very funny in my consulting career, which is now 20 years, my second job. And I was out working with a roofing contractor, and in the middle of the work, he interrupts me and he goes, I get it, I get it. I go, what do you get? He goes, if you want a really good apple pie, you ought to shop for really good apples. And so what he meant by that is if finding the right people on the front end here is really important. And in this particular case, there are way more young, willing people out there that need a skill or a career than there are these, what I call a lightning in a bottle, which is magically they know everything. They're a good team player. They work hard. They're self-motivated. Should I go on? As to what that is. Now, you may be lucky enough to find that once, maybe twice. It's really hard to scale your business that way. So that's really what we did. And we worked on always looking for, we always hired 5 apprentices at a time. And then we ran them through our training program. It was all systematic as to how long you are an apprentice. When do you go to apprentice to junior tech training? How long do you have to be in a truck before you earn the right to get to be tech to senior tech to field supervisor? We had ways to move it. In our particular case, even though it was just Long Island, and when I say just Long Island, 115 miles, it was New York City traffic. We had one main hub shop, the main office, and we had 3 satellite shops, which were run by field supervisors because the drive time was that crazy. So someone could rise up through the ranks and go and run one of those satellite shops. And if we were so disposed, we could have gone anywhere, Jersey, Connecticut, the rest of it. So shops that I've worked with, the great garage door guy out here, A1 Garage, Tommy Mello, he's in, I don't know, 20 states at this point, and he can replicate the business because now he has the systems. And great contractor, Keith Pinkerton, Mr. Electric down in Alabama and Tennessee, he's got 8 shops. And now that he has the systems and the ability to, move people up, those shops run like the main shop, which is no small thing. I defy anybody's business. I was actually in another podcast. Going to go quick story here. I was in another podcast, and I said, without systems, I defy you to be able to move a mile away from where you are today, and it won't run the same. And they started to laugh while I was talking. And I go, what's so funny? He said, well, we had a growing carpet business back then, carpet restoration, cleaning. And then we ran out of space, so we bought the building next door, and you would think we were on the other side of the earth.
Yeah, that's very true. Okay, my next question. You talk about the 10 guidelines for meetings. So I would love for you to go into that because me personally, like I've seen where meetings have been run really well, and I've seen the negative sides where meetings are run not so well. And so I think having this 10 guidelines going into a meeting could be really helpful for everyone. So if you want to elaborate on what that is and how you use it, that would be great.
Yeah, we never met at our company because we, like everyone else, were too busy. We had way more stuff to do in a given day than we've done. So it's akin, of course, now I understand, look, I'm a way smarter person than I was back then. And also everything's much funnier these days, Riley. It's not funny back then. But we didn't think we had time to meet. But then again, where do we find all the time to fix their mistakes is what I always look at. So if I found you in the woods chopping down trees with a dull axe, I would walk up to you and go, if you come back with me, we could sharpen the axe and you'll chop down more trees. And you look at me and go, I would, but I'm busy cutting down trees. And so this is why do we hate meetings is really the first big way to look at this. We hate meetings because we think of the meetings that we have in our community board where they just talk and talk and talk. Everybody has their opinion. We eat some donuts and coffee and we come back next week to talk about the same thing. Your house of worship is the same kind of meeting. These are not the meetings I speak to. And if you have an operating manual for each box, as you should, we are always talking about at least 1 to 2 pages out loud about what could we do better, cheaper, faster, which is where this continual improvement happens. And if you're measuring performance, well, you asked me to do my homework and we're not going to talk about it. So this is what meetings are. So first thing first, the meetings everyone needs to know when the meetings are, and they need to know you come to this meeting until we say don't come. Meetings in our case used to be is we didn't talk to anybody unless somebody really messed up. Now it's 6 months since the last time we met. We're going to drag all of you into this meeting. And now we're going to just go on for 6 hours telling you about how you thoroughly let us down. And everybody sitting in there goes, I don't know why I'm at this meeting. We all know it was Riley who messed up. And so these are all the reasons they're ineffective. So a short agenda is number one. Regular meetings that have a start and end time. One of the things I hate is I got to this meeting on time. I'm in my chair. We have to wait because no one else is here on time. So one of the absolutes is we always start on time. If I'm doing a seminar or webinar, you can bet I'm starting on time. The second thing is I've got appointments and things to do out of here. So we better end the time. I don't care how interesting it is. I don't care where we left it off. Make a note of it and then schedule another meeting if need be. But we break out. Only have the people that should be in that meeting. I know you want to be politically correct. This is not the time. The people that are needed to be in there and that are intensely involved with it, at least because you want them to get a chance. This isn't designed to be a lecture. It's designed to be an interchange. Now, depending on what you do, I really like a round table, a square, whatever you do, where we're all seated and having a discussion. When I'm having a lecture, I'm at the podium, you're in the chairs. And so there's a different thing to that. Meetings have to be held in a good meeting space. If the lights are blinking and the heating and cooling don't work and the chairman is wobbly, what does that say to the powers of your meetings? Those are some issues as well. And we stay on topic. So I'm talking about how you should come dressed to work, because that's spelled out in the manuals. And you put your hand up and go, I've got a question. I go, what's the question, Riley? You go, where should I be parking my truck? And if I answer that question, we're down that rabbit hole.
Absolutely.
So, you know, it's a great question, Riley. But today we're talking about this. So either stay with me after, check what your manual says. But today we're talking about this. And so I don't let myself get hijacked. Those are some of those 10 guidelines to meetings. Everywhere that they pull them in, it's been great. And if I have 2 more seconds here, I really just like to add a really good story.
Go for it.
Yeah. So I worked with a phenomenal contractor in Vail, and they just do a lot of trades. We took them from where it was just like, you know, being a hospital, everything that we hated. And just, you know, it was people, not systems. Now it's great systems with great people. And we did a lot of great things. And he would always check in with me, just, you know, a call after we did our work, you know, saying how things are going and everything's good. So COVID hits. I don't know how many months we're into it. He calls me up. He goes, I don't know what happened. I go, what do you mean? He goes, you remember how when we originally, it was us and them going at each other's throat when you first showed up and how good we got together? All of a sudden, we're back at each other's throats. I don't know what happened. I said, well, what changed? And he goes, well, you know, we couldn't meet in person, so we stopped all the meetings. And I go, whoa, whoa, whoa. I said, there's Zoom, there's FaceTime. No, we don't stop that. So I said, go back to the meetings that you have every week for everyone who has manuals in their own meetings. And then I want you to call me up in about 2 weeks to give me a report. And he called me up in 2 weeks left, and he goes, it's like it never happened. I'm sorry, I'm still Serve Pro there, but you know, it really is that magical. Again, you have to have something very structured to be leaning on. So the very tight agenda is one of those key things to do.
Yeah, I think that's great advice for all companies. Okay, I've got 2 more questions for you, Al.
Okay.
So one of the things you mentioned in your book was about your dad, and you said this phrase, and I thought this was a really interesting phrase. You said closers equal trustworthy. I wanted to make sure I got it right. Closers equal trustworthy. And I want you to elaborate on that just in general and like how that plays itself out in the real world.
Well, actually, yeah, I was in sales, and my dad was a phenomenal salesperson, not because he was my dad. He was not like me. He was quiet. I'm 6'2", and he was maybe 5'6", 5'7". But he loved people, and they knew it. And he would actually talk like this. And when I would go on calls with him, people would start to lean in while he was talking. And I tried to imitate him. And it was a disaster. So I finally had to just be who I am, as you can see, more loud, more just my own style. But I did come to him one day and I go, Dad, you know, do you have a great closing line? Do you have a great closing line? And my father, who was very, very nice, so make sure this comes across that way, he goes, Al, if you need a great closing line, you really stunk till now.
Yeah.
And that's so the point of this is I needed to create from end to end the sales system.
Mm-hmm.
I arrive with this. I ask these key questions. I write down their answers. I get permission to look around. I design a perfect solution. I address their FAB, which is the tenet of all sale, feature, advantage, benefit for everything I'm recommending. And I take the time to go through and I make sure that they're talking,
Mm-hmm.
because when they're talking, they're buying, which it took me a while to do. Now, I
Sure.
was very shy, and you can, by listening to this, you can tell I'm over it. But I was very shy when I was young. And in sales, I did all the horrible things, which is I was staring at my feet. I didn't make eye contact, all the things that you need to do. And when I finally got enthusiastic and did all the learned things from Dale Carnegie and such, I didn't know when to shut up. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know when to shut up. The illustration of that was I was out selling a big job, and I'm going through the big details of it. And the customer interrupts me and goes, "Al, it sounds fantastic. When can we get started?" I said, "Hang on a second. Let me finish up what I want to talk about." Fortunately, I didn't know what I was doing then, but I go, obviously, like I share this. This is true, by the way. It's going to sound like a joke, but I finally learned that I have to lightly bite my tongue to
Mm-hmm.
shut up long enough to let others talk, because otherwise, again, I'm in the sell mode
Mm-hmm.
versus getting them to talk. Because when I'm talking, I'm selling. When they are talking, they are buying. So those really change the dynamics, and it really not only improved the sales, it just improved the total customer user experience.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. It kind of just boils down to having a relationship and a rapport. Like
Yes.
those you can't oversell that. Like that's what matters in life, in sales, and pretty much everything.
Yeah,
Okay,
it does help that you know what you're selling.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, so it goes hand in hand.
My last question for you is, in your book, you mentioned the Wizard of Oz analogy, and you talk about that in regards to contractors. I'd love for you to explain what that means and how that comes about.
So I kind of tipped my hand with earlier about, if you have a million boxes and a million layers on your org chart, I have to go through everybody, even if you're giving me a career where you have all these steps, if it's good to have some levels along the way. So think about climbing a mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what you mentioned about salary levels. I got sick of people coming to my door, "When do I get a raise?" And I blamed them again, but it was really me, because I was making grown-ups act like 5-year-olds asking for a bump in their allowance.
Mm-hmm.
So when I got in front of these things, that's some of what I learned. But the Wizard of Oz thing here is that, the great powerful wizard, once they pulled the curtain back, there really wasn't anybody there. But even if there's this wizard, there shouldn't be 50 people in your way of getting to speak to. So again, the org chart is pretty flat. There's in our particular case, there's a warehouse manager, a fleet manager, but there's a marketing manager is a key
Mm-hmm.
box, and they're in charge of the people who are answering the phones, because they're go hand in hand. There's a service wing with a service manager and people underneath them. There's the sales manager who's in charge of, believe it or not, everything to do with big install. So
Mm-hmm.
it makes sure that if it's not sold right, and hopefully this resonates with everybody, a big job. If it's not sold right and then turned over to the fulfillment department, it doesn't count. It does not
Mm-hmm.
count. So you may be the best salesperson in the world, but if you're not, building these things correctly. Now, my team used to prove to me on a regular basis, this big ticket salespeople, that they would bring me every dollar I ever wanted, and they proved that I could go broke on every job they sold. And so I had to change that equation, and that's for all the architects and all the people that are out there. This should resonate with you, which is projected material, projected labor, gross profit versus the office counting up. Well, here's what the actual labor was. Here's the actual material. Here's the actual gross profit.
Mm-hmm.
And in my climbing that ladder, I should be able to get. So when I talk about the org chart here, there's really 4 things that you get from an org chart. Why would I? Let me rephrase that. Why would I care about your box org chart, whatever it
Yeah.
is? Where am I today? Where can I go tomorrow? That was the question you said. If coming out of college, I ought to look at that, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
can I go? And I did a great job of explaining to everyone, whoever first arrived, where your life cycle here is and where you can go, and you get to drive that car. Who is my real boss? Because everywhere I walk around here, people are yelling at me.
Mm-hmm.
And the last one is, when I need help and it's not in my manuals or in my training, who can I go to? Those are the four things. And whoever that wizard is, I have, it's not an interruption to you today. I've earned the right to come to you.
Hmm. Yeah. And I like the analogy you talk about too when you talk about how Dorothy is trying to get home, and in the process the lion develops courage and the Tin Man
Yes.
develops heart and all of that. And you mentioned that it's inside the contractors this whole time. These principles just simply highlight that and make it possible for them to achieve that
Yeah.
goal.
When I show up at a shop, it's not like I have to, I will admit here is a lot of my work was rewiring the owners, but I could never say so. And so, but it's not that a case of I was trying to manipulate anybody. The reason they invited me in, and there's only two types of contractors I've ever worked with. One where they've done a really great job, but they've gotten to the ceiling where they
Hmm.
can't clone themselves. And now they
Yep.
know that they need systems to build. Or
Yep.
you're a great marketer and you've expanded your company wildly, but every time the phone rings with a new job, that's gasoline to a fire. And they
Yep.
know they need a foundation to handle this and wherever else they're going. And so, yes, inside you, I don't care who you are, you have those things. It's not like I can create them for it. People ask me also, the most successful, largest shops is what should my managers do to motivate people? What should the managers do to motivate people? And I go, right now, nothing. And they don't like that answer at all. And so, what I mean by that is, again, until you've got the boxes at the bottom and you figure out how their career is, if they're interested in a career, you don't have to spend a lot of time in the motivation. You
Hmm.
don't know what motivates me. It's all different across the spectrum. But
Absolutely.
that's why you have to put a lot of carrots out there.
Hmm. I think that was well said. And if you haven't read Al's book, you really should. It's called The Seven Power Contractors. It's phenomenal. I read it this week and I was blown away by it. So, Al, I really appreciate you being here, being a part of the show. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for the opportunity. I always love to share this, having struggled and found a better way and helping others to find it. That's really my mission.
All right. Well, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you guys next time.